Alright, let's go. Number 10. Peppermint tonic. The night before a medieval army marched into battle, a physician would move quietly through the encampment, preparing a steaming preparation from dried peppermint leaves. Mentha piperita. Crushed into boiling water and pressed into the hands of soldiers who would fight at dawn. This was not comfort, this was calculation. The 12th century abbess and scholar Hildegard von Bingen documented peppermint in her pharmacological compendium, Physica, written around 1150 CE, recommending it specifically for heaviness of the limbs and the fatigue that preceded great physical exertion. Peppermint had been a medicinal staple long before medieval Europe codified its use. The Roman scholar Pliny the Elder documented its application in Naturalis Historia in 77 CE, noting that soldiers who wore mint garlands reported feeling sharper and more alert during campaigns. Benedictine monasteries across France and England cultivated peppermint in their physic gardens from the 9th century CE onward, and their monk physicians supplied military campaigns with herbal preparations whose precise physiological effects they understood through centuries of empirical observation, even without the vocabulary of modern pharmacology. What the medieval physician could not have named, but clearly understood, was the neurological mechanism behind peppermint's potency. The active compound, menthol, triggers cold-sensitive receptors in the body known as TRPM8 channels, producing a powerful sensation of opened airways and heightened alertness that is entirely real, despite being neurologically generated. Warriors who drank a peppermint preparation before battle were not simply warming themselves with a pleasant infusion. They were activating a genuine physiological response that made breathing feel easier and fatigue feel distant. Modern research published in the Journal of the International Society of Sports Nutrition in 2013 by Memorbashi and Rajabi confirmed what medieval physicians had observed empirically for centuries. Peppermint supplementation measurably reduces perceived exertion and increases grip strength and respiratory efficiency during physical performance. The accounts in the chronicle Shu Gesta Francorum, which documented Crusader medical practices during the campaigns of 1096 to 1099 CE, describe herbal tonics administered before engagement, consistent with precisely these kinds of preparations. What makes this seemingly mild substance genuinely remarkable is the gap it exposes between medieval knowledge and medieval understanding. The physicians who dispensed peppermint tonic before battle were achieving measurably real pharmacological results through a mechanism that science would not formally identify for nearly 900 years. They did not know why it worked. They knew only that it did, and in the hours before violence, that was knowledge enough. Number 9. Juniper brew. Around 800 CE, in the fjord settlements and longhouse encampments of Scandinavia, Norse warriors preparing for a raid would drink a bitter, pungent brew fermented from juniper berries. Juniperus communis. Crushed into ale and left to steep until the liquid turned a deep, resinous amber. The smell alone was bracing. The Icelandic historian Snorri Sturluson, writing in the Heimskringla around 1230 CE, recorded pre-raid preparations among Norse warriors with a specificity that suggests these rituals were standardized and deliberate, not incidental. Juniper was not a casual addition to the Norse pharmacological arsenal. The 10th century Anglo-Saxon medical manuscript, Lacknunga, catalogued today as Harley MS 585 in the British Library, documents juniper's medicinal applications across Germanic and Norse cultures, including its use as a treatment for pain, fatigue, and infection. Archaeological excavations at the Viking Age trading settlement of Hedeby, known in German as High Thabu in northern Germany, conducted between the 1930s and 1960s, uncovered significant deposits of juniper berries in contexts suggesting deliberate preparation and storage, not accidental botanical presence. The chemistry of juniper is more complex and more dangerous than its culinary reputation suggests. The berries contain active terpene compounds, including alpha-pinene and sabinine, which produce documented analgesic effects alongside mild stimulant properties. Warriors who drank juniper brew before a raid were receiving genuine pain-blunting chemistry alongside the disinhibiting effects of the fermented base. At moderate doses, the preparation dulled discomfort and sharpened aggression. The Lacknunga. also documents juniper's use as a wound treatment and antiseptic, confirmed by modern microbiology research demonstrating juniper oil's antibacterial activity against Staphylococcus aureus. Here is where the intoxicating logic of the juniper brew begins to fracture. The same terpene compounds that made it a primal pre-battle preparation also act as blood thinners at higher doses, a pharmacological reality documented in modern clinical literature. The Norse warrior who drank deeply to numb his fear before a raid may have been simultaneously ensuring that any wound he received would bleed with greater severity and be harder to stanch. The brew that blunted the anticipation of injury may have amplified its consequences. Juniper served the Viking warrior as stimulant, analgesic, and battlefield antiseptic in a single cup, a ritualistic preparation of startling biochemical sophistication. Whether the Norse physicians who formulated it understood the blood-thinning risk is unknown. What is known is that they kept using it, suggesting the courage it produced before battle was considered worth whatever it cost afterward. Number 8. Valerian root. In the military campaigns of the Byzantine Empire during the 10th and 11th centuries CE, physicians attached to imperial armies faced a problem that no amount of training could solve: the paralyzing terror of men about to enter combat. The solution they had reached for was Valeriana officinalis, Valerian root, prepared by decocting the dried root in wine for 3 to 4 hours and administered to warriors in the tense hours before engagement. This was not a stimulant. It was something more precise and more counterintuitive, a deliberate anxiolytic, a substance designed to take the shaking edge off fear. Valerian's documented history as a pharmacological agent stretches back to the Greek physician Dioscorides, who recorded its properties in De Materia Medica around 65 CE, recommending it for anxiety and disturbance of the mind. That text remained the primary pharmacological reference across European and Byzantine medicine through the 15th century CE, meaning that military physicians who administered Valerian before battle were working from a documented tradition more than 1,000 years old. The Old English Herbarium, surviving in multiple manuscript copies from the 9th century CE onward, further records Valerian's use for calming the nervous system under conditions of acute stress. What makes Valerian genuinely remarkable is not its reputation, but its mechanism. Modern pharmacological research has confirmed that valerianic acid and isovaleric acid, the root's primary active compounds, interact directly with GABA-A receptors in the brain, producing a measurable anxiolytic effect that reduces the subjective experience of fear and anxiety without significantly impairing motor function. A study published in Phytotherapy Research in 2002 by Andreattini and colleagues demonstrated that Valerian preparations reduce clinical anxiety scores by between 36 and 48% in controlled trials, a figure that would have been entirely recognizable to any Byzantine military physician who had watched a trembling soldier steady his hands after drinking the preparation. The genius of Valerian as a battle preparation was its specificity. Unlike alcohol, which blunts both fear and coordination simultaneously, or stimulants, which raise alertness but can tip into panic, Valerian targeted the neurological substrate of terror while leaving physical capability largely intact. It made a frightened man functional. In the brutal arithmetic of medieval warfare, where hesitation in the shield line could mean death for everyone around you, that distinction was not merely pharmacological, it was tactical. The GABA-A pathway that Valerian acts upon is the same pathway targeted by benzodiazepines, the pharmaceutical class that includes modern anti-anxiety medications prescribed today to combat veterans managing post-traumatic stress. Medieval Byzantine physicians, working from Dioscorides and empirical observation, had identified and were routinely exploiting the same neurological target that 21st century psychiatry considers foundational to anxiety treatment. Number 7. Mugwort. Around 1000 CE, an Anglo-Saxon medical scribe copied into what is now known as the Lacnunga manuscript, Harley MS 585 in the British Library, a remarkable incantation called the 9 Herbs Charm. It names 9 plants of power, and it names mugwort. Artemisia vulgaris, first among them calling it the oldest of worts, and evoking it specifically for strength and endurance. This was not mere poetic decoration. Behind the ritual language was a plant containing active compounds that produce measurable neurological effects, and the warriors who used it before battle were not simply performing ceremony. Mugwort's pharmacological identity is closely related to wormwood, its more notorious cousin in the Artemisia genus. Its primary active compounds include thujone, camphor, and cineol, a volatile terpene combination that produces stimulant effects through inhalation of burned smoke or consumption as an infusion. The Old English Herbarium, preserved in manuscripts from the 9th century CE, documents Anglo-Saxon warriors placing mugwort in their boots during long marches to prevent fatigue, a folk practice that describes transdermal absorption of camphor through the skin of the feet, a mechanism that modern pharmacology confirms is genuinely functional. Thujone's mechanism in the brain is counterintuitive and important. Rather than acting as a sedative like alcohol, thujone functions as a GABA-A antagonist, meaning it blocks the receptors that produce inhibition and calm. The result is a state of excitation, heightened sensory alertness, suppressed fatigue signaling, and, at higher concentrations, vivid visual disturbances that the medieval world understood as visions. Warriors who burned mugwort before battle and inhaled the fragrant smoke were, in pharmacological terms, dosing themselves with a compound designed to remove the neurological brakes on aggression and endurance. Mugwort was documented across Celtic, Germanic, and Anglo-Saxon military cultures with remarkable consistency, suggesting that its effects were empirically recognized and deliberately sought across centuries and geographic boundaries. Its use in ritual context before battle, particularly the burning and inhalation method, appears repeatedly in accounts from the period, described in terms of spiritual preparation that may have been simultaneously, and without contradiction, a real pharmacological intervention. When medieval chroniclers described warriors entering battle in states of preternatural focus and seeming imperviousness to pain, they were reaching for spiritual vocabulary to describe something they could observe but not explain. How many of those accounts were describing men in a thujone-altered state of genuine neurological excitation, their inhibitory systems suppressed by a volatile compound inhaled from burning herbs, fighting with a biochemically assisted ferocity that no amount of courage alone could reliably reproduce? Number 6. Mead elixir. The Norse mythological tradition preserves the memory of a substance called audrerir, the mead of poetry, a drink that conferred not merely intoxication, but transformation, granting warriors courage beyond the natural human threshold. Snorri Sturluson's recorded its properties in the Prose Edda, written around 1220 CE, and the earlier poems of the Poetic Edda, composed orally perhaps 2 or 3 centuries before their written transcription around 1270 CE, describe it with a reverence reserved for sacred things. The myth was persistent because the substance was real, and the real substance was far more dangerous than honey wine. Mead, in its battlefield formulation, was not the romantic drink of modern imagination. Analysis of a Bronze Age vessel recovered from the Egtved girl burial in Denmark, dating to approximately 1370 BCE, and published in the Journal of Archaeological Science, confirmed the presence of mead residue alongside deliberately added psychoactive botanical material, establishing a tradition of deliberately spiked fermented preparations stretching back more than 3,000 years before the medieval period. By the Viking Age, this tradition had become sophisticated. Medieval battlefield meads were documented as containing bog myrtle, Marica gale, yarrow, Achillea millefolium, and other botanicals with specific pharmacological properties. Bog myrtle is the most significant of these additives. Marica gale, which grows abundantly across Scandinavian wetlands, contains myrcene and related terpene compounds documented as potentiators of alcohol intoxication, significantly amplifying the effect of fermented preparations beyond what their alcohol content alone would produce. The Táin Bó Cúailnge, the great Irish epic recorded in manuscript form around the 12th century CE from an older oral tradition, describes pre-battle mead rituals among Celtic warriors, in terms consistent with a preparation designed to achieve a specific altered state, not simple drunkenness. The alcohol content of documented medieval meads ranged between 8 and 15% ABV, sufficient to produce meaningful disinhibition at the serving sizes recorded. But it was the botanical additions that transformed mead from a feast drink into a battlefield preparation. Each herb was selected for a specific contribution. Bog myrtle amplified the intoxication, yarrow acted as an analgesic and coagulant to manage wound bleeding, and other additives modulated mood and aggression toward the particular state commanders required from men about to charge an armed enemy. The mead hall was not simply a place of celebration and fellowship, it was a dispensary operating according to a pharmacological logic that was empirical, intergenerational, and ruthlessly pragmatic. The ritual drinking before battle was the medieval world's closest equivalent to a pre-surgical preparation protocol, and the men who designed those protocols understood their chemistry far better than the myths they built around it would suggest. Number 5. Saffron tonic. In the decades surrounding the Crusades, the most expensive spice in the medieval world by weight was not pepper, not cinnamon, and not exotic resins from the Far East. It was saffron. Crocus sativus. The dried stigmas of a small purple flower, worth more than silver by volume in the markets of Constantinople, Baghdad, and Marseille. And in the courts and military camps of the Islamic world, it was being prepared as a pre-battle tonic for elite soldiers, its cost alone signaling the desperation with which medieval commanders sought any advantage chemistry could offer. The Persian physician Ibn Sina, known in Europe as Avicenna, completed his Canon of Medicine, the Al-Qanun f al-Tib, in 1025 CE, a text that would remain the foundational medical reference across both Islamic and European scholarship for centuries. In it, he documented saffron as a fortifying preparation with specific benefits for mood, energy, and mental clarity under conditions of physical and psychological stress. The Persian epic Shahnameh, composed by the poet Ferdowsi around 1010 CE, lists saffron among the preparations associated with elite cavalry warriors before major engagements, situating its military use within Persian culture as an established tradition, not an innovation. The pharmacological basis of saffron's battlefield reputation is more rigorous than the spice's culinary identity suggests. Its primary active compounds, safranol and crocin, have been demonstrated in modern research to inhibit the reuptake of serotonin, dopamine, and norepinephrine simultaneously, producing a neuropharmacological profile that is genuinely antidepressant, anxiolytic, and mildly euphoric. A warrior who consumed a concentrated saffron tonic before battle was receiving a preparation that modulated 3 major neurotransmitter systems at once, blunting despair, reducing fear, and producing a state of heightened, purposeful energy. The danger was calibrated and real. At approximately 5 grams of raw stigmas, a dose exceeding the therapeutic range, saffron becomes acutely toxic, producing convulsions, hemorrhage, and, in documented historical cases, death. The Arabic medical sources that circulated among Crusade-era physicians warned explicitly of this threshold, and the fact that those warnings were necessary suggests that miscalculation was not purely theoretical. In the military camps of the 1095 to 1291 CE Crusade period, documented in Arabic chronicle accounts of the era, a physician who misjudged a saffron preparation was not making an academic error. In a world where a warrior's pre-battle tonic could cost as much as a destrier warhorse, what does that tell us about how completely medieval commanders believed that human chemistry could be purchased and directed toward violence? The saffron tonic represents something more than pharmacology. It represents the ancient visceral conviction that the difference between a man who holds and a man who breaks is not always courage. Sometimes it is chemistry. Number 4. Wormwood. By the time English longbowmen assembled at Agincourt on the morning of October 25th, 1415 CE, wormwood, Artemisia absinthium, had been a documented military preparation for centuries. Military supply records from the 100 Years' War period preserved at the National Archives in Kew detail herbal provisions among the materials traveling with English armies, and wormwood appears among them, brewed into bitter preparations that soldiers consume before major engagements. The Taquinum Sanitatis, a 14th century medical handbook surviving in multiple illustrated manuscript copies, documents wormwood preparations with explicit dosage warnings that reveal exactly how narrow the margin was between fortification and catastrophe. Wormwood's reputation in the modern world derives from absinthe, the potent distilled liqueur that produced epidemic psychological disturbance in 19th century Paris and was subsequently banned across Europe and North America. But the raw wormwood preparations consumed by medieval soldiers bore the same relationship to distilled absinthe that a glass of wine bears to surgical-grade ethanol. The concentration of active compounds in undistilled wormwood is dramatically higher than in any regulated absinthe formulation, making the medieval preparation significantly more volatile and significantly more dangerous than its later cultural descendant. The key compound thujone acts on the brain as a GABA-A antagonist, blocking inhibitory receptors and producing an excitatory, disinhibiting neurological state that at therapeutic doses generates fearlessness, suppressed pain perception, and heightened aggression. These effects were empirically documented and deliberately sought. The Herbarius of Pseudo-Apuleius, surviving in Latin copies from the 9th century CE onward, describes wormwood as a battle fortifier with a specificity that suggests its military application was standardized rather than improvised. Medieval physicians knew what it did. They also knew what happened when the dose exceeded the threshold. Above that threshold, thujone's GABA antagonism tips from excitation into convulsion. A warrior who received too strong a preparation could be seized by violent, uncontrolled muscle spasms before he ever reached the enemy line. The Taquinum Sanitatis documents this explicitly, warning that excessive wormwood causes shaking of the limbs and loss of the senses. A clinical description of tonic-clonic seizure activity. Historical records from the 100 Years' War period include accounts of soldiers incapacitated before battle by preparations that were meant to fortify them, a grotesque failure mode built into the pharmacology of the drug itself. If a substance powerful enough to cause seizures in excess was considered an acceptable pre-battle preparation, what does that tell us about how the men of the medieval world understood the relationship between the body, the mind, and the violence they were about to commit? The answer, written into every wormwood preparation dispensed at a medieval encampment, is that the risk of the medicine was simply part of the calculation. Everything about war was a gamble. The chemistry was just more honest about it. Number 3. Cannabis resin. Around 1273 CE, the Venetian traveler Marco Polo recorded an account he had gathered during his journeys through Persia of the Nizari Ismaili sect, known across the medieval Islamic world as the Hashashin, the assassins. According to Polo's Il Milione, written around 1300 CE, their leader would administer a substance to selected warriors that transported them into a vision of paradise, a garden of extraordinary beauty and pleasure, before informing them that only death in his service would return them to it. The substance was hashish, the concentrated resin of Cannabis sativa, and the warriors who consumed it became the most feared fighters in the medieval Middle East. The Persian chronicler Juvaini had documented the Hashashin with greater historical precision in his History of the World Conqueror, completed in 1260 CE, and the Crusader chronicler William of Tyre had written of them with evident dread around 1180 CE. The word assassin itself entered European languages from the Arabic, though the precise etymology linking it to hashish remains debated among modern historians. What is not debated is the archaeological evidence. Excavations at the Hashashin fortress of Alamet in Iran, conducted by the scholar W. Ivanov in the 1920s and 1930s, produce material consistent with cannabis cultivation and preparation on a significant scale. Tetrahydrocannabinol, the primary psychoactive compound in cannabis resin, produces a documented pharmacological profile that makes its battlefield utility intelligible rather than mystical. At the concentrations achievable in concentrated resin, THC produces profound analgesia, measurably reducing acute pain perception, alongside altered time perception, disinhibition, and at higher doses, genuinely dissociative and hallucinogenic states. Research in pain pharmacology has consistently demonstrated that cannabis-based preparations can reduce acute pain perception by substantial margins. Achieved through THC's activity as a partial agonist at CB1 receptors in the spinal cord, the same receptors targeted by the body's own endogenous pain management system. The genius of cannabis resin as a battle preparation was not the vision of paradise, it was the analgesia. A warrior who feels no pain fights differently from one who does. He continues when others stop. He sustains wounds that would halt a man in his right neurological state and registers them only later, if he survives at all. Cannabis use as a battlefield analgesic was documented not only by the Hash Shashin, but in Tang Dynasty Chinese military manuscripts from the period 618 to 907 CE, where it was recorded as a treatment for arrow wound pain in the field, suggesting that this application was discovered independently across multiple military cultures separated by thousands of miles. The assassins' commanders had discovered, centuries before Western medicine would formalize the concept, that the most dangerous soldier is not the one who has been told to die for a cause. He is the one who has been chemically convinced he cannot feel the cost of doing so. Number 2. Mandrake. In the scriptorium tradition of medieval Europe, no plant inspired more elaborate mythology, more careful ritual, and more documented terror than mandrake. Mandragora officinarum. It was said that the plant screamed when pulled from the earth, killing anyone who heard it. It was said that its root was shaped like a human body because it grew from the ground beneath gallows. These myths were not idle superstition. They were a cultural warning system built around a substance so genuinely dangerous, with a therapeutic window so narrow, that the men who harvested and administered it had every rational reason to surround it with prohibitions. The pharmacology of mandrake justifies every word of that mythology. The active compounds in mandrake root, hyoscyamine, scopolamine, and mandragorine, form a combination of anticholinergic alkaloids that produce a state unlike any other substance in the medieval pharmacopoeia. At effective doses, mandrake causes profound analgesia, dissociation from physical sensation, and hallucinatory states in which the boundary between the self and external reality dissolves. The medical school of Salerno in Italy, operating from the 10th through 12th centuries CE as Europe's foremost center of pharmacological knowledge, documented the use of the soporific sponge, the Espongia somnifera, a preparation combining mandrake root with opium and henbane used as a surgical anesthetic before procedures, a record preserved in surviving Salernitan manuscripts that confirms mandrake's capacity to render a human being genuinely insensible to pain. The Geoponica, a Byzantine pharmacological and agricultural encyclopedia compiled in the 10th century CE under the patronage of the imperial court, documents mandrake preparations and their effects with clinical precision, placing their use within a Byzantine intellectual tradition that treated the plant as a legitimate, if extraordinarily dangerous, medical tool. What the Salernitan surgeons used to permit an incision without screaming, military physicians used to send men into battle in a state of anticholinergic dissociation, genuinely unable to register injury with the normal urgency that injury demands. The therapeutic index, the ratio between an effective dose and a lethal one, is among the narrowest of any documented medieval preparation. A dose 2 to 3 times the effective amount is potentially fatal, producing convulsions, cardiac arrest, and respiratory failure in a sequence that medieval physicians could observe but not reverse. Scopolamine, one of mandrake's primary alkaloids, is classified today as a chemical incapacitating agent by modern military doctrine, and has been documented in intelligence literature as a truth serum used in interrogation contexts. Medieval military physicians were deploying it in battlefield preparation centuries before modern states codified its use as a weapon. When medieval chroniclers recorded accounts of warriors who fought on through wounds that should have stopped them, who appeared to be something other than human in the heat of engagement, they were reaching for the only vocabulary they had. Many of those accounts were describing men in a Mandrake-induced anticholinergic state, temporarily suspended outside the reach of pain, fear, and the knowledge of consequence. A dissociation so complete that the line between a man and a weapon had been pharmacologically erased. Number 1. Henbane. In 1954, archaeologists from the National Museum of Denmark excavated a burial mound at Fyrirkat in Jutland, uncovering the grave of a Norse Velva, a ritual specialist whose role in Viking Age society combined medicine, prophecy, and the preparation of warriors for battle. Among the objects in her leather pouch, alongside carved implements and animal remains, were seeds of Hyoscyamus niger, henbane. This was not a symbolic inclusion, it was evidence. The most feared warriors in medieval European history, the berserkers of the Norse sagas, were in all likelihood not supernaturally empowered by divine fury. They were pharmacologically altered by the most potent anticholinergic preparation in the medieval world. Henbane contains 3 primary active alkaloids, scopolamine, hyoscyamin, and atropine. Together, they produce what modern medicine classifies as anticholinergic toxidrome, a syndrome characterized by profound analgesia, agitated delirium, visual and auditory hallucinations, tachycardia, and a state of frenzied, purposeful aggression in which the subject feels no pain and perceives no danger. The Ynglinga saga, recorded by Snorri Sturluson around 1230 CE, describes the berserker state, berserker gang, with a clinical precision that reads differently once the pharmacology is understood. Warriors who could not be harmed by fire or iron, who possessed the strength of bears, who fought in a trance-like fury that ended only with exhaustion or death. Professor Neil Price of Uppsala University in his landmark 2002 study. The Viking Way, published by Uppsala University Press, proposed henbane as the most pharmacologically coherent explanation for the berserker state, drawing on the combination of saga accounts, archaeological evidence including the Fyrirkat burial, and the known neurological effects of Hyoscyamus niger. The Velva figure who carried henbane seeds was not incidentally associated with warriors, she was their pharmacist. The burning of henbane seeds, which release scopolamine vapor when heated, documented in ritual contexts throughout the saga literature, represents an inhalation delivery method that would produce onset within minutes, consistent with the sudden transformation that saga accounts describe. The Ebers Papyrus, Esh, an Egyptian medical document dating to approximately 1550 BCE, documents henbane's use in a medical context, establishing a continuous thread of human engagement with this plant across more than 3,000 years of recorded history. Modern forensic toxicology has confirmed that scopolamine and hyoscyamin remain detectable in hair samples for up to 90 days, meaning that archaeological remains from Norse conflict sites could, in principle, carry chemical evidence of pre-battle henbane administration that has never yet been systematically sought. The evidence already gathered points in one direction with a consistency that is difficult to dismiss. The most feared warrior in the medieval world was not the strongest, not the most skilled in arms, and not the most devoted to his gods. He was the most completely pharmacologically remade, a man temporarily reconstructed by chemistry into something that experienced no pain, registered no danger, and could not be reasoned with or stopped by the ordinary mechanisms that cause human beings to hesitate. The berserker legend that shaped the terror of Norse warfare across 2 centuries of European history was, at its biochemical core, the story of a plant, a woman who understood it, and a seed carried in a leather pouch into a burial mound in Jutland, waiting 11 centuries to tell us what it knew. If you want to see more videos like this, click the video on screen now and make sure to subscribe.